All right. Well, again, I will say welcome. We'll go ahead and get started so that we can make the most of our time together. So first, happy Valentine's Day to everyone. Happy that you could join us on this special day. And welcome to our Winter Alumni College session. This is the Being an Ally to Black, Indigenous, and People of Color session. My name is Paul Sealing. I am from the class of 2009 and work in the alumni office as the Assistant Director of Volunteer Engagement. Also from Worcester on the call today, we have Stephanie Maringer, who has been the person putting together all of these sessions. So if you have enjoyed the Winter Alumni College, you can say thank you to Stephanie for her work on that. And also Sonia Pagnano, who's from our annual giving team as well. If you have any questions about Zoom or having any troubles, feel free to put that information in the chat and we can help you. You're also welcome to ask questions or share feedback in the chat as well as we move along. We do ask if you're able to have your camera on. We would love to see you and feel like that gives us a chance to feel like we're back at Worcester in a classroom and seeing each other a little bit. We know that's not always possible, but you're welcome to have your video on. And then we also have a live transcript available of the session today. So you'll see that in the chat. You can click on the link and see the transcript of everything that we are saying today. And so I will then introduce our featured guest here, Jessica Spradley from the class of 2003, and say thank you to her for volunteering to lead this session for us today. And she's going to introduce kind of what things will look like for today for us. And she also has shared, she'll share her contact information here at the end. So if you have any follow-up questions or want to get in touch with her, that she's happy to do that. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Jessica. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Paul. And thank you, Paul, Sanya, and Stephanie. This is amazing. I was so excited when I saw this call. I was like, all right, the education continues. And I feel like that's like in typical Worcester fashion, right? We're always learning, we're always growing. And so I'm really proud to be a part of this, and I get to share with you all a few things that I do on a daily basis. So my name is Jessica Spradley. In like 3 weeks, it'll be officially Dr. Spradley. So super excited about that. My husband, for those of you that are not in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the roads are so bad. And my husband was going to get our oldest daughter to take her to ice hockey. They didn't make it to the game, and they just got home. So you get all of me today. But we're gonna have some fun. I guess that's what we can call it, right? And so one of the things that I was explaining just before we let everyone in from the waiting room is I've got a lot of content to share with everyone, but I also genuinely believe that this is a conversation, right? We need some time to be able to process things. So on the front end, I'm going to go through a presentation, but on the back end, we're going to have a lot of time for questions and answers, and just to really process some things. So I don't want you to feel like if you have a question, you can't put it in the chat. Please put it in the chat. If it's a question, you're like, oh my goodness, I'm going to forget. I always tell people to grab a piece of paper and a pen. And that's your parking lot, right? You're going to park your questions in there like a car, and you can write them down there so you don't forget. And if it's something that you're like, we can't miss this right now, just press the reaction button, raise your hand, and Paul, Senior, or Stephanie will get you unmuted and we can work from there. I am a professor by trade. And so you're never going to ask a question that's going to offend me. You're not going to interrupt me and then I'll get all messed up or anything like that. And I've been teaching on Zoom for about a year, so I'm pretty much a professional. That's what I like to think anyway. So we're going to jump in. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself, but I also want to learn a little bit more about you. So Paul had said earlier, if you could put something in the chat. So if you could put the year that you graduated and the city that you live in now in the chat, I would appreciate it. And for all of you who are towards the 2000s or below. My daughter, she's 7. The other day she was like, "Mommy, this is really old. I think it was created in the 90s." And I was like, "Oh, the 90s, eh?" Oh, yay. Oh, Matt, Columbus, Ohio. See, this is what I love. My family is in Columbus, Ohio. Metro Detroit area. I went to grad school in Ypsilanti. Oh, no worries, James. That's okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump in. And so now that I know that everybody is good with the chat, I'm going to ask I want you to think about the question, why are you here? Okay, because in a little bit, I'm going to ask you that question, because there's a bunch of sessions in this, I'll call it a symposium, that you could have gone to, but one of the ones you chose to register was for this. So I'm going to ask you in a little bit, but I don't want anybody to be caught off guard, okay? So I'm going to share my screen with you, and we're going to jump right in. So we are going to be talking about, I'm going to give you some practical steps to becoming an ally to Black, Indigenous people of color. And what I want you to understand, though, is we're not just going to jump in and I'm just going to give you a 5-step process and then you're like, woohoo, I'm leaving, I'm going to be an ally. We've got to really, in order to understand where we are and where we're going, we've got to understand the historical aspects. So I am going to fit a whole bunch of history into the 50 minutes, and we're gonna get some good stuff done. So as an overview, I'll give an introduction of myself, my husband, what we do, and how long we've been doing it. We'll talk about your why. Again, I asked you that question, why are you here? We'll talk a little bit more about that. We're gonna contextualize a problem. We're going to talk about a problem between people, defining an ally, and then looking at the social construction of race. We're going to look at the foundational approach that we use in our business. We're going to talk about practical application, right? What does it look like to be an ally? And then we'll talk about your personal next steps. And so the outcomes, we like to keep it really simple. One, you're going to understand your role in the problem, right? Where do you fit in? 2, identify ways to intentionally disrupt racism and act as an ally, because being an ally is an active way to disrupt racism. And then you're going to identify your first action, right? So I'm not just going to speak at you for a long time and then you leave, be like, man, I'm so happy I'm smarter. I want you to leave with some actual things that you can do, right? Because it's great to have knowledge, but if you can't implement them in your daily life, then it's just taking up brain space. And so for myself and my husband, Dr. Paul Spradley, we have over 20 years of combined experience. He started diversity, equity, and inclusion work in 2007. I started it officially in higher education in 2009. And it wasn't booming and super popular back then. So we have gone through this emotional roller coaster of being hated and popular at this, in the same context of our careers. We both focused our doctoral research around some aspect of race. So for me, my doctoral research has been all about influencing attitudes about race. And since I'm a professor, it's really looking at the pedagogy that we utilize in classrooms to teach people about race. Is it effective? Is it not effective? How do we even know if it's effective, right? So I really measure attitudinal change. So because I believe that attitudes precede actions. In Paul's case, he was looking at how to provide exceptional care for Black males, especially through mentoring, right? When you get into spaces and people are providing mentoring, how do you provide exceptional care? And through his research and and his publications, one of the things that we have really attached to is this idea of caring for people. And that's really how we approach this idea of being an ally to Black, Indigenous people of color. Between the two of us, we've hosted hundreds of conversations, guided strategic planning to improve inclusive cultures in businesses, nonprofits, and educational school districts. Our company is 4 years old, and we've already reached 6 figures, and it's been amazing, like this, walking people through this process. And so now that you know everything about me, and I am an open book, so when we get to Q&A, please feel free to ask me questions. One of the things that I want to know is put in the comments why you're here. And a lot of people over the past, I will say, year, with the racial climate in the United States, have felt like they've been forced to do something, right? Especially after the murder of George Floyd, and the social climate between COVID and racial injustice kind of had us smashed in this box, right? And everybody was like, okay, our business needs to make a statement. We need to do this. We need to do this. And a lot of people didn't even know where to start. And so my 2 questions, and this is where we can unmute and begin the conversation, is if this is your first time seeking out any information or participating, or even if it's not, what barriers have kept you from acting before? And then what's your why for wanting to do something now, if you haven't done anything before? And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody. So what barriers have prevented you from acting before, and why do you want to start now? Okay, Julie said to be able to better support staff who work for me and feel supported and comfortable within the corporation. Okay. Okay, wonderful. Oh, Larry, okay, your church is engaged in a conversation, okay? Larry, so I really appreciate that. I actually am working with 2 Christian school districts. And so it's been an amazing opportunity to incorporate this idea of racial reconciliation with Christianity and build things for them too. Recently retired at a new stage of life, wondering how we can help. So those are all great answers, and keep putting them in the comments. The reason that I ask this is because when you engage in any sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that's what I mean by DEI. So further in the presentation, if I say DEI, I mean diversity, equity, and inclusion. When you engage in any kind of work or exploration or education, it's not always going to be easy. Right? You're not always going to be the favorite person in the room, especially when you're trying to be an ally for people or to people, if there's any sort of oppressive context. And so one of the things that you have to be really certain on is your why. Why am I doing this? Because if you don't have a reason behind it, it's going to be so easy to give up. I'm going to share back my screen with you. And please feel free to share what barriers have kept you from acting before, and we'll get into those in the Q&A section. Okay, so let's I want to contextualize this conversation. So let me give you a little bit of a historical background. So race is a social construction. So I'm going to leave that as a sentence. Race is a social construction. What does that mean? It means that we were not evolved as a society saying this is Black and this is white and this is Hispanic and this is non-Hispanic. Those were things that were created by people. That's what I mean by a social construction. Because this happened hundreds of years ago, it is now fact in our society, right? It's something that every single one of us grew up understanding. From the time we were born and our parents or guardians are filling out hospital papers, they're checking boxes for us, right? So it's something that for us just is. Originally, it wasn't used as only a descriptor. It was used as a separation technique. So it was a visual way to say, okay, these people are enslaved and these people are not enslaved. And I can literally, just by looking at you, tell, okay? A lot of people think that race in the United States came before this idea of white supremacy. Race is actually a manifestation of white supremacy. So race in itself is a separation technique that's based on a hierarchy, right? So it was like, okay, these people are at the top, so they deserve X, Y, and Z. These people are at the bottom, so they only get A, B, and C, right? It's not that the race separated us. There was already separation, and in order to validate that separation, race was created as a reason. So it's like, how do I want to say this? And I use, you'll get to know me over the next hour, but I use very inconsequential examples so people can identify, right? So if I want new boots, okay? And there's snow outside. I might walk outside and be like, oh man, look at these boots, my feet are wet. And then I'll complain to my husband so much that he'll just say, all right, get some new boots, right? I wanted the new boots. That's why I walked outside, right? And so that's how I want you to, on this very extremely smaller scale, think about race, right? Why it was created. This idea that some people were better than others was already there. And in order to justify that idea, the concept of race was created. Put a 1 in the comments if that makes sense. So what happened is race became a concept. It's a concept of thought, a framework for people understanding this hierarchy, okay? And this hierarchy is not based in anything over ability. It's really based in fear. It's based in fear, and it was created as a way to distribute resources, right? If I know that we are all, if we are separated and I have 5 oranges, right? And I'm at the top of the food chain, so I get to eat until I'm full, then I'm gonna have 4 oranges and then everybody else can share 1 because I'm at the top. I get these 4 oranges, right? This social construction helps me understand I don't ever have to fear being hungry because I know that I'm at the top, and I've created this understanding so everybody else knows I'm at the top, and whatever's left, everybody else can share, but I don't have to worry about that. So this idea, so although it may seem, I'm making it seem very simplistic because it is very simplistic. And in the base beginning, it's a separation, a visual separation technique for hierarchy, right? And over the years, it's gotten very, I would say, convoluted and complicated because it's become a permanent existence. And what we've done as a society is continued to contribute to the separation technique. Now, be it a reclaiming of the narrative or taking something that was meant for bad and putting it as good, we all have the opportunity to continue to maintain or actually address the system that's in place, right? But there are now multidimensional aspects. There's now, it's not just white and non-white. That's how it started, right? There used to be a 1-drop rule. If you had 1 drop of any race or ethnicity of color, then you were non-white. But now there's so many different aspects of race. It's very multidimensional, and it complicates our human condition. There's a sociologist, last name is Murdahl. He had a very famous publication in 1944, and it's called The American Dilemma, okay? And what Murdahl says is, here's the dilemma. We want to be considered good people. We want to be good humans, right? We want people to look at us and say, people from around the world to say, look at America. We want to be like the United States. But we don't want people to know the very dark truths that allow us to be that way, right? We don't want people to look at how we treat our Black, Indigenous people of color. We don't want people to look at or interrogate the history of slavery or oppression or anything in our society. So we want to be these good people, but we need to do these bad things to keep up that image, right? And so what Murdahl says is there's an American dilemma that we haven't dealt with. As a society, we haven't dealt with it. That's the problem that exists between people, is because we haven't dealt with it. Now, in 1944, it looked like, okay, we have this history of chattel slavery in America, but we also look really good internationally. So let's keep up that image. And now it's the same thing. It's just manifested itself in different ways, right? I have this really good image of myself, so I don't want to have this conversation because I don't want people to call me a racist. I don't want people to see me as bad. We've inserted this idea of morality, good and bad, into a conversation that was originally about hierarchy and separation. And so it's complicated our entire human condition to where we have had such a hard time even having a conversation. And so one of the things that it's proved hard to do is to know even what racism looks like. Before we could say, okay, it's burning crosses in people's yards, it's lynching people, it's denying access. But now racism has become so subtle and so ingrained in every social institution that we have individual racism, we have structural racism, we have complicit racism. And so it's hard to know even where to start, right? But the one thing that we all have to start with is we have to be comfortable losing something in order to do the right thing. We have to be comfortable losing something in order to do the right thing. That doesn't mean that I'm saying, all right, everybody, go clear out your bank accounts and divide it to all the people of color you know, right? Although if you do that, I hope I'm the only person of color you know, so everything comes to me, right? I'm not saying do that, but what I am saying is, in order to do the right thing, right, which is giving voice to voices that have not been included, we have to get uncomfortable. We have to say, you know what? I don't know about this. So I know that I'm retired and I've had an amazing career, but now I've got to start learning about something that I have zero idea what to do about. I am not the expert in this area, but I'm going to put myself in the position of someone else so I can try to better understand the experiences of Black, Indigenous people of color and what they're going through. It's really uncomfortable for me to say that I have been the recipient of any sort of privilege because my family grew up poor and I'm still poor. So I don't even see racial privilege. And it's going to be really uncomfortable for me to even consider that somebody else experiences something different because they don't have the same skin color as I do. The conversation in itself is uncomfortable, right? I can guarantee that there are people that are on this Zoom right now who are like, I'm just going to sit back and listen because I am not saying anything. I just want to learn. So when I do say something, I don't say the wrong thing, right? I guarantee, and I can say that because I've done hundreds of these presentations. I literally teach in higher education on the sociology of race. Right? And so everybody is uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable because I'm usually the only person of color in the room. And people are like, I know everybody sees it, but nobody wants to say anything. right? Because it's weird. Like, what do you say? But in order to do the right thing, in order to understand even my position of being the only Black woman in the room, we have to acknowledge that I'm the only Black woman in the room, right? If we're going to make it to a point where we can even start talking about race, we have to acknowledge that it's in our society. We can't say things like, there's only one race, the human race. I get that we're all human, and I subscribe to that we are all part of the human race. However, my specific experiences as a Black woman in the United States have been impacted by me also being a part of the Black race, by me also being a female. Does that make sense? And so in order to talk about it, we've got to get uncomfortable, right? And we've got to get comfortable losing something. You lose your sense of safety when you step into this arena. We all like to say, well, in the higher education field, people say things like, we have safe spaces. I tell my students that no space is safe. I'm not interested in creating safe spaces. I'm interested in creating brave spaces, where you can be brave enough to be authentically who you are, but also hear the authenticity from any other person that comes into our community, whether it be their authentic voice or it's their voice on paper. And so you got to get to know your trigger spaces. If somebody calling you a racist is a trigger space, we got to get over that. Right? Because if you get triggered, a lot of times when people get into their trigger spaces, it turns a conversation from a learning experience to a winning experience. You're no longer learning from other people, or people are learning from you. You're trying to win an argument. And you turn from being authentic to being convincing, right? So you got to know your trigger spaces. And when you start having these conversations, I'll be honest, a year from now, you're going to have a conversation, and then you're going to get super angry, and you're like, I thought I mastered my trigger spaces. But you're in a brand new situation, and somebody said something, and you're like, they got me. I got pulled into the trap. It happened to me like a week ago, and I was like, they got me. But we're constantly learning. Everybody is constantly learning, right? And so so we've got this idea of racism, where it came from in the United States. That was my condensed version. I could literally spend an entire semester on that, but I feel like you all will get the gist, right? So let's talk about what the role of an ally is, right? This idea of allyship, a lot of people will say, oh, I am an ally, like it's a badge that you put on. But the definition that we use of an ally, it's a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals and or groups of people. Trust, consistency, and accountability. It's a lifelong process. It's not something that I can achieve one time and then that's it, right? It's not self-defined. I can't walk into a room and be like, what's up, LGBTQIA plus community? I'm an ally, holla, right? I can't do that because I don't get to walk in a room and tell people I'm their ally. I have to build those relationships. I have to build the trust. I have to be consistent, and I have to be accountable for my missteps. And the community, the marginalized community, gets to tell me I'm an ally. And being an ally it's not a noun, it's an action. But you don't, anybody go to a grocery store with a like a perks card? Wave your hand. I go to Giant Eagle, right? And I'm like, oh, I have this thing where I wait until the very end, and the cashier's always like, do you have a Giant Eagle card? And I'm like, yes, and I'd love to see my savings. And I swipe my card, and then bing, 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 I get all these savings. Now I can go to register 9 or 1 or 7, and I can swipe the same card, and it's all, I'm a member. right? It's all the same savings. It doesn't matter what cashier is working. That's not the way allyship works. It's not a membership perk that you can just go anywhere with anybody from one identity and you can say, I'm an ally to X, Y, and Z people. If Jane is my lesbian friend and Jane knows that I'm ride or die for her, she knows that I'm an ally for her, that doesn't mean that I can go over to Susie and just because Susie's a lesbian, I can tell Susie, you know what? I've got my friend Jane and Jane said I'm an ally, so we're good. It doesn't work like a perks card. The reason this work is so hard, especially being an ally, is because it's not about making that connection with one person that belongs to a group. It's about building those authentic, trusting, and consistent relationships with multiple people. You have to do that every single time. You don't get it's not like Cedar Point where you just get a pass, right? A yearly pass. That doesn't work. And so it's work. That's why it's not a noun, it's an action. And it doesn't always mean that you building relationships with people is where your allyship stops. Okay, you can be an ally when people are there in front of you, but you can also be an ally when people are not there. The two most common ways that I have heard people being an ally when people for other people is one, being a sponsor. And what being a sponsor really means is creating space at the table for somebody else, right? If there's something going on, how do I include, if I work at a Fortune 500 company and we are planning a Women's History Month brunch, and I look around the table and I'm the only woman there, I may say, you know what? I think that this is a great idea, but I really think that, would you all mind if I bring Stephanie into this meeting? I think that she does a great job planning stuff and I really like to hear her perspective. I'm sponsoring her in that moment, right? I'm bringing her in on my legitimacy and I'm making space for her voice. Calling out inappropriate behavior. I don't know about you, but I can even think back to my times at Worcester, and I think about the times where I had the option to tell people that the joke that they said was racist, or I just passed. And hopefully nobody goes and looks up all of my records, but I was the person that would be like, that's so not funny. Or I feel like I'm offended by your comment. And I'm going to be honest, it was a little bit racist. Now I would just say racist, but then I was like, it was a little bit, I'm trying to maintain my popularity. But, like the idea of calling out inappropriate behavior allows you to be an ally for Black, Indigenous people of color, but it also allows you to be an ally for any marginalized community whose voice is shut down in that moment. These are things that you can use for really to be an ally for any group. And so when we look at this problem, right, why do we even need allies? Every single institution in the United States has been and still is steeped in racism. Everybody gets up in arms and worried when I say that. But here's the thing. Our entire world for hundreds of years was based on this idea of supremacy and hierarchy. So the institutions that were created are a reflection of that, because that was our culture. And so there are almost daily examples of Black and brown people still being harmed and oppressed. And it can be in different ways. If you even, I could Google right now the probability of a Black woman with a long name having her resume looked at twice. And there would be hundreds of articles or examples that would come up of discrimination based on names or discrimination based on accents. right? And so there are daily examples of these things happening. Most people don't desire to understand racism and its impact because it's difficult. It's steeped in our culture and our social institutions, and a lot of times it's overwhelming, so people don't desire to understand it because it's too big. Most people have a deep desire to understand, though, or to be understood as a good person. I want to be good. You know what? Until I had kids, nobody in this world thought I was perfect. And now that I have kids, I want everybody to look at me like that. I am so motherly to all of my students. I even like bring them cookies and stuff because I like them. They think that I'm an amazing person. I mean, I know that I am, but I like other people to think it too, right? And so our owning of acts of racism, it goes against that narrative, right? There's a book called Why Do Good People Do Bad Things? And so if you're a good person, there's no way that you could be racist. And this idea that you would even lean into that or see that some of the institutions that you belong to are racist, or some of the businesses you patronize are racist, or some of the people in your family are racist, that goes against the narrative that you're a good person, right? And so we unconsciously sustain racism through overwhelmingly and continued silence. A lot of times when people have, when you're silent, people misunderstand it as consent. If I'm in a group of 7 people and somebody says a racist joke, and I'm the only Black person there, it's against Black people. Black people are always late. Ha 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 ha. Everybody laughs, right? I don't say anything. This person goes and tells the same joke to another group of people, and they're like, dude, that's racist. That person's going to say, that's not racist. I told that joke to my friend Jessica, and she's Black, and she said it was okay. I didn't say it was okay, but I didn't say it wasn't, right? But in that moment, when everybody's laughing, there's no negative social consequence for the racism displayed in even this idea of humor, that people are perceiving my silence as consent. And then that consent becomes part of the narrative. Well, Jessica's fine with it, but I'm not fine with it. You didn't ask me. We never had this conversation, right? And that goes back to this idea of building authentic relationships, because people in authentic relationships can talk to each other. Some of my best friends, I have told them, look, girl, that I'm gonna be honest, those jeans make you look fat. I feel like you shouldn't wear those today. I'm that friend. I'm that friend that'll tell you you have a booger in your nose and I really want you to get it out because it's bothering me, or I'll reach over the table with my napkin, right? Those are authentic relationships. Now, are they happy that I say that at the time? Probably not. Well, I think that people will want to get the booger out of their nose. But other than that, right, they might not be happy, but they always know that they're going to get honesty and authenticity from me, right? And that builds a genuine relationship. So we have conversations about all kinds of stuff, because in my authenticity, I can hear their authenticity also, right? And what's happened over the past year, specifically in the United States, since the 1960s, the United States has not been presented with an overwhelmingly, and this is my personal argument, an overwhelming moral obligation to do something that's forced by social action. And what I mean by that is it's been since the civil rights movement where racial injustice has been all over the television, right? We are all in Corona, so nobody could say, I don't know what's going on. Who is this guy? And his name is George Floyd. Who is he? Who is Breonna Taylor? Right? If you don't know, don't tell anybody you don't know, just Google it, okay? But because of because of the global pandemic and the rate at which these things are happening and the social exposure, we have all been suddenly thrust into this idea of understanding race, understanding racism, and picking a side, right? What are we going to do? Actions without direction can be harmful. If you just go out and say, I'm an ally, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, that can be more harmful than good. And so that's why it's necessary for us to have this conversation about allyship. And so when we look at this, so here's the foundational approach that we use. Our company is called Care-Based Leadership. And the reason it's called Care-Based Leadership is because we operate on 5 types of care. The first is safety. Now, again, I don't think that there's this idea of safe spaces. I think that there's idea of brave spaces, but everybody feels safe enough to bring them their authentic selves into that space. Does that make sense? Okay. There's this idea of emotional care. When you have any sort of emotion, whether it's anger, whether it's frustration, whether it's a tenderness or a sensitive feeling, those feelings deserve to be acknowledged no matter who you are. That's emotional care. There needs to be culture affirming care, right? If I go into a space, I know somebody put in the comments they want to talk about this because of the people that they work with. When I go into a space, is my culture affirmed in that space? Do I see myself when I look around? Social care means helping people understand the social context in which they're operating in. A great example of this is my husband. He's now an assistant vice president for diversity, equity, inclusion at a bank. And so he's in corporate world right now, right? But he used to be in higher ed, and he ran a center for student success. And one of his mentees came in his office and he was like, Dr. Spradley, I'm so excited. I'm going to the job fair. And he was like, my husband was like, you're going to the job fair? When is it? And he was like, in 30 minutes, I'm about to, grab some food and then head over there. He was like, but you don't have on a tie. And it was a corporate job fair. The student was in finance, and he was like, I didn't even know I needed a tie. My husband takes off his tie. He took off his jacket. He gave both of them to the student. He said, here's the thing. If you go into a space where the culture is already established and you don't understand it, it's quite possible that you may be counted out before you even know. And so that's social care, right? You're helping them understand the social environment in which they operate or that they're going into. And that in itself provides safety. And then organizational care. One of the things that we do a lot is we work with our different clients to create individualized diversity, equity, and inclusion plans, strategic planning, etc. And if you're looking at it from a work perspective, there has to be some commitment from the organization. It can't just come from one member of the staff. If you're in a church, it can't just come from one elder in the church or the greeters at the door, right? There has to be some sort of institutional or organizational investment in why you're doing what you're doing. So how does this happen? Cultural responsiveness. We make sure that we learn the culture and climate that we're going into. There has to be elements of restorative justice. A lot of times we don't realize how much harm is done until after the harm is done. So there has to be some times when we go back and say, I'm sorry. I didn't know this, but now that I know this, I'm going to change it in the future. And that's adaptive leadership, right? Sometimes relationships are severed because of issues of race, and we didn't know that they were happening because we haven't built those authentic relationships where we can communicate openly and honestly. And in order to do that, we may have to just adapt how we do things in the future. We may not be able to restore previous relationships, but we can still go back and acknowledge and apologize. That's restorative justice, right? This is being an ally. I want to be very clear. It is a very thankless job. Nobody's going to come up to you and be like, thanks for being my ally today. I hope you have a good night's sleep. No, it's long term. This isn't something that you just jump into and say, I want to be great today. I want to stand up for Black people, Indigenous people, all people of color today. And then tomorrow you go do something that is perceived as racist, right? It's long term. It's a long-term commitment. And that's why you have to have a clear why. So I know I asked the question in the beginning, but that's something I want you to sit with after this, right? If you want to do more work, why do you want to do it? And let's now talk about, let's move from this idea of this theoretical aspect of being an ally to some practical application, right? This is likely the reason that you're here. I just like to give all the rest of this stuff so you all have some meat to the stew, right? So how can you make action, like how do your actions display that you're an ally to Black and Brown Americans? And the reason, before I get into that, I want to say, when I would say the professional term is Black, Indigenous people of color, but there are a lot of social scholars that would say that sometimes you just have to call things out and be plain. And I would reference Ibram Kendi. He wrote a New York Times bestseller book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I say that sarcastically just because it doesn't mean anything because you write a book about it, right? Like, but I like what he says. And so that's one of the reasons that sometimes I go from Black, Indigenous people of color to Black and Brown people. It's just a way of being inclusive to all different types of people of color. And so let's talk about these actions of an ally to, and I want to be very specific about that word to and emphasize. So there's this idea of empathetic listening, right? I think that we all know somebody who's a one-upper. You'd be like, girl, I ate a cheeseburger today. And they'll be like, that's okay, Jessica, because I ate 5 cheeseburgers 3 years ago. And you're like, great, I was just telling you about my cheeseburger, right? To be an ally, you have to have empathetic listening. When you are talking to Black and Brown people, it is not your opportunity to process. If there's some damage that's been done, you have to empathetically listen. And I have literally coached people who cannot help but talk in a conversation to understand how to reflectively listen, right? Okay, what I hear you saying is, and then they get to repeat what the other person is saying. Tell me if I got this right? Because some people, they can't help but just to talk in a conversation. And it's okay to check on your Black friends. Right after the death of George Floyd, me and my husband, we lamented together and we cried, and there were people that called us, and there were people that we talked to, and there were people that we didn't talk to, and it's okay to check on your Black friends, but it's also okay to check your privilege and say, you know what, I understand that these communities are hurting right now, and I don't expect them to educate me right now. We did this presentation over the summer, probably about maybe 10 or 12 times. I also did a presentation on how to talk to your kids about race, probably about 20 times. And I didn't do it because I wanted to do it. I did it because I really understood that my Black and Brown friends were going through it. And none of them wanted to talk to their white friends about race. And so in understanding empathetically where we were, since I do this for a living, I've gone through extreme traumatic events and still been able to work. I've learned how to compartmentalize things. And so that was me being an ally to my friends. Does that make sense? And so sometimes you've got to check your privilege and understand what you're expecting. Is it realistic? And am I expecting this because I'm privileged. Be a sponsor, be actively involved in aiding someone's career progression, right? Is there an opportunity where you're like, oh, you know what? I think this person will like this opportunity, and I'm just going to invest in their career. I'm not going to be their competition, but I'm going to be their cheerleader today because I know that they may not get a voice. That could mean passing on a job posting. That could mean giving somebody a tie. That could mean having a conversation, volunteering to look over a resume. Honestly, like, there are people that invested in me, and somebody paid the cost of my application to Worcester because my family wouldn't have been able to afford it. Had I not have that person that invested in me, I literally would not be here right now. You can support the interests of the Black community, right? Supporting Black businesses, supporting brown businesses. Sitting in those moments with people of color is very important. I have some Asian American friends, and over the past week, there's been a lot of attention on violence toward Asian American communities. And for all of my friends, I sent them a text that said, I'm feeling deeply in this moment with you, and I just want you to know I'm here for you if and when you need me. I didn't say, you got to talk to me about this. Tell me about what's going on. I did the work myself to understand what's going on, and I just wanted them to know that I'm here for you, right? Like, if and when you need me, I'll be here. But I'm still going to do the work, right? I'm still going to do the work myself. Don't ask Black or brown Americans to educate you or speak for all Black people. One of the things that I always tell people when I do presentations is when we're talking, and this is my caveat now for when we open up for Q&A, when you're talking, I expect you to talk out of your own experience. You are not the expert of every identity you belong to, but you are the expert of your own experience, right? That's the only thing that you can talk out of, and that's the only thing that I expect. So I ask people to use I statements. I can't speak for all Black people and how they felt after the death of George Floyd, but I can tell you how I felt, and I can tell you how my family felt. And understand that Black, Indigenous people of color are navigating aggressions every day. And some days they will be tired, some days they will be upset, and we have to go back to this idea of empathetic listening to understand where each person in our life is, right? And so I can't say that your Black friend is tired today or they're upset today. You got to talk to them to understand that. Does that make sense? Because there will be things that impact our communities differently. When we say people of color, that's a very broad term. And my Asian American friends are suffering right now, but I'm sitting in that moment with them as a person of color, right? It impacts them differently. So you have to build those authentic relationships to really be an ally and understand where those gaps that you can sit in are. Now we talked about actions 2. Now I want to talk about actions of an ally for Black and brown people, right? So there's an element of being an ally that is incredibly difficult, because there are some times when the people that you, or the person that you want to be an ally to, are not in the room. So your voice will serve as the allyship. So the first thing is educate yourself, right? I'm so happy that everybody came to this session, because y'all are rock stars and I like to talk. So thanks for spending Valentine's Day with me. But you're starting the work, right? No matter where you are on this journey, and it is a journey, you're starting the work. So you've got to put in some personal time and investment. Do some regular training and get some guidance from a professional. I cannot say this enough. And it goes back to when you don't have direction, sometimes the best intentions can be harmful. Get some guidance from a professional. The reason I do this is because, well, one of the reasons I do this is because I have been in some diversity trainings that are horrible and harmful. And I've done the research. I think you have to do, 10,000 hours to be an expert. I'm an expert in this area because I did the work myself, right? Like I wanted to prevent things that have happened to me from happening to anybody else, and to take people to a place where we can be inclusive, where people feel safe to be authentic, right? And you need a professional's help because this is a very sensitive subject. It's not something that you can just wing and say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to have this conversation, because it can be detrimental. There's books, podcasts. You'll see my email address at the end. I get that everybody does not want a 400-page book. There are some amazing podcasts. There are some docu-series. There's some YouTube videos. There's all kinds of media out there to help educate. So don't feel like it just has to be a book. You can speak up and call out inappropriate behavior, especially when other people are not in the room. Don't stop attempting to make your peers comfortable. Remember a while ago I said we have to get comfortable losing things in order to do what's right. If Nana's using the N-word at Thanksgiving dinner pre-COVID, right? Somebody's got to tell Nana that that's wrong. And there's going to be consequences to that. Whether it's your mom saying, I can't believe you disrespected your elder, or maybe you won't be invited to Thanksgiving for Nana, or maybe there'll be positive consequences and people will be like, oh my gosh, Paul, I am so glad you said that, because everybody was thinking it. You just had the courage to say it, right? But you're not at any point, you have to stop making other people feel comfortable. Stand down and own your own inappropriate behavior when called out. One of the two words that I have that are so healing and transformational from allyship is I'm sorry. Because we're going to mess up. You're going to mess up. I mess up all the time. I may have messed up in this presentation. I don't know. I'll watch the recording, but we're going to do it. We are humans. We are imperfect, right? And so if somebody says to you, you know what, Stephanie, you said this and it really offended me. Your first, our innate response is, I didn't mean to do that, right? I didn't mean it. But you know what? If I step on your foot, regardless of my intention of stepping on your foot, it doesn't allow you to unexperience that pain. So instead of trying to convince people of your intentions, take a step back, own your behavior when it's called out, and say, I'm sorry, I'll try not to do it again. I appreciate you telling me your feelings. And again, that goes into, right, checking your privilege in situations. You can also utilize your privilege. What spaces are you in that you can create voices for other people? Ask your organization to see its diversity plan and goals. Secretly, sometimes I've coached some of my friends into what to say to their supervisors. And they'll say, can I see the diversity portion of our strategic plan? And when somebody asks for it, if you don't have it, a lot of times we have a committee to talk about that. We'll get that together, right? But that one simple question can get the ball rolling. Volunteer with organizations that support Black Americans, that support Brown Americans, that support Indigenous populations or people of color. Support Black-owned businesses. If you are in a space where you can impact supplier diversity in your organization, look at ways that you could look at Black, minority, women-owned businesses. And the reason I say minority, I don't like that word, but it's a government certification. So those are the certifications that you can look for. See if your optometrist is people of color. And if we have any optometrists that have people of color owned businesses, go ahead and put your business in the comments. Advertise for yourself. That's a alley-oop for somebody to put their business in the comments, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like, support the businesses of other people, because more often than not, they don't have the advertising dollars to be able to be seen on the same level as, I don't know, someone like Staples. Have your company host inclusion trainings with a professional. It can be me. It could also literally be anybody else. I'm not that person that's going to be like, I'm the only person that can do it right, because I have some amazing friends who are doing this work, who have been doing it for even longer than I have. But I really encourage business entities to do it with a professional. Reach out to somebody that can consult, that understands the culture and climate. Include senior leadership. Don't just think that this is something for people who are on the ground working. It's always best to have a top-down approach. And when you're doing that, more often than not, you'll serve as an ally to some community, because most senior leadership tables are not fully diverse. And disrupt racism. And here's what I say to people. Start in your lane, right? We're talking about having your company host inclusion training with a professional. You may not be at a company, right? You may just be an independent business. That's not your lane, and that's okay. Your lane, you may be a stay-at-home mom, and a lot of people are like, oh, that's, I don't have anything. I'm just a stay-at-home mom. I tried that for a few years, and that's one of the hardest jobs I've ever had. So props to stay-at-home moms. However, you have an amazing responsibility to the little humans that you have in your care, right? That's your lane. That's where you're making a difference. If you're a teacher, you're making a difference to the people that you have in your care. If you're a nurse and or you're in the medical field, there's an amazing book called The Medical Apartheid that talks about racial injustice in healthcare, right? You can start in your lane. You don't have to jump out of where you are to say, okay, I want to be an ally, so now I've got to go and get this corporate job. No, where are the spaces that you can work in right now, right? What is something that you can do right now? Demand change for harmful practices against Black people or brown people or Indigenous people in your workspaces, in your communities, right? It doesn't have to just be where you work. Maybe there's something that's going around in your neighborhood or something that's happening. And then vote. We have an incredible obligation as citizens to vote. I don't care which way you vote. I don't care anybody's political affiliation, but I do care that people participate in the process. It's the one time where everybody literally has equitable access. And I'm not talking about like voter suppression or anything, but I'm saying that everybody's vote, that single action, is valued equitably. And so I want to also give me 2 more minutes, but I want to get to this example of corporations acting as an ally. And this is specifically for Pittsburgh. So Giant Eagle is a really big chain of grocery stores here. Giant Eagle announced that they were taking several steps to stand up against racism. They committed a $350,000 contribution to support racial justice causes. They also closed all of their locations on one Saturday to discuss racial issues. Additionally, one of the things that they did that was even most impactful is there's only 2 major newspapers in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They put a halt on their advertising dollars for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and they stopped selling the newspaper because there were recent actions by the publication that were racist. And not only did they put their money where their mouth was, but they said as a company, they're not going to just temporarily halt advertising, but they're not going to go back to funding this entity until the Post-Gazette demonstrated an equal commitment to all those communities that it served, right? They were using their leverage as a grocery store chain to address systematic racism that was happening in print publication. That's staying in their lane. I don't own any grocery stores, so I can't do that, right? But you know what? I do shop. I do need groceries. I eat sometimes, right? So I'm going to patronize Giant Eagle because I know that they are supporting anti-racist practices. I'm still in my lane. I'm doing my part. And I'm supporting people that are using their allyship effectively. So as a recap, right, we understand the problem in its context. We know what an ally is. We understand the social construction of race. We take a foundational approach of caring, right? Caring for other communities, but also understanding that we need care. And we understand that there are applications. You have some next steps. Here's the major next step. 1, understand your why. Right? I've said that a couple times. Why do you want to do this work? And then 2, identify your lane. Where are you going to start? Is it asking your employer for their diversity, equity, inclusion plan? Is it saying, can I see our strategic plan? Are there any diversity initiatives there that I can look at? Is it empathetically listening to people that are in your network who need that, right? So your 2 next steps, why am I doing this? And where's my lane, right? And so we've achieved our outcomes. You understand your role in this problem, right? Or you're getting to understand where you fit in. Identifying ways to intentionally disrupt racism and act as an ally, right? We just went through all of those different aspects. You can pick one of them. You can say, you know what, I love that, and it's inspired me to think about it this way. And then you identify your first action. You've already started to think about why this work is important, and that's what's going to tie you to it. And so my call to action is, what will you begin to implement beginning on Monday? Tomorrow. Yay. What's one thing that you can do tomorrow? And I want you to write that down. And then I want you to write down who will hold you accountable for doing that. For me, whenever I want some accountability, I call my mom because I talk to her every day. I'm that girl. Like, if my mom doesn't answer her phone, I'm going to call her 3 times. Be like, Mom, are you okay? She's probably like, yeah, I'm making breakfast or something. But like, and it's been like that. I lost my dad in 2014. And so I make sure that I talk to my mom every single day. So when I want some sort of accountability, I'm like, Mom, I'm going to do this on Monday. Write it on your calendar. And I just need you to ask me if it got done. Who's your person, right? Who's going to ask you about that? How are you going to be accountable? So that's my call to action for you, because I don't want this to just be, you got on this call, you listened to me talk for an hour, and now it's like, great, I checked that off my box. We don't want to be box checkers, right? Being an ally is an action, and it's a journey that we go on. And I'm happy to be on this journey with you. I'll open it up for Q&As, but I'll leave my email address up there. Our company is Care-Based Leadership, LLC, cultivating agency to care for rather than merely just care about people. My email is jspradley@carebasedleadership.org. Our website is www.carebasedleadership.org, and you can find us on all the socials. Um, you can even just search Paul Spradley or Jessica Spradley. I always put this link on there. This is my Instagram link. It's the only one that has a underscore in the middle of it. Everything else is just Jessica Spradley. So you can feel free to reach out to me via email, reach out to me via social media, any of those things. And so, let's see. Okay. I usually, when I do a lot of presentations, I do a special offer. If you reach out to me, I would be more than happy to provide anybody with a 10% discount on our services. So if you reach out to me and you can just say, I have the code WOO alum, or you can have your boss reach out to me or your HR department and say, use the code WOO alum, and I know that it's, I'll give them a 10% discount. So yes, that is my presentation. I want to open it up for Q&A. And I know that we're recording, so I want to say officially thank you, everyone. Even if you're not in the session live, you can feel free to reach out to me. If you're an alum, a parent, a friend of the College of Worcester, anybody can use the WOO alum discount code.